Hi, this is Randy Spivey, CEO and founder of CPPS, the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. And I want to take just a few minutes to talk about a trend that I'm starting to see happen as it relates to financial damages and penalties being charged against organizations that are involved in extreme violence events. Not just companies, but cities, counties, and even federal agencies. We're starting to see some pretty significant damages that are being mandated in the aftermath of some of these tragic events. To put it in perspective a little bit, for several years, we've been watching these cases unfold, and it's not unusual over the years to see a $1 million, $2 million, $5 million settlement or jury award to the families that were impacted by a tragic incident like an active shooter in a workspace. But what we're starting to see over the last couple months is those numbers increase dramatically. To give you a couple of examples, the aftermath of the horrible school shooting in Parkland, Florida, the Department of Justice agreed to pay over $127 million to those that were affected by that horrible shooting, partly because of the lack of follow-up to warning signs that were reported, tip lines and hotlines, and basically they agreed that the ball was dropped, and opportunities to try and prevent that incident from happening were missed. A similar amount was much higher amount, $230 million. The Department of the Air Force was mandated to pay as a result of the horrible church shooting down in Sutherland Springs, Texas, at a church shooting several years ago. I happened to sit in on a FBI briefing on that particular event, and this guy who was a former Air Force member, got kicked out of the Air Force for issues related to domestic violence, wound up going and shooting up this church where his mother-in-law actually worshipped. But the Air Force did not pass the information to the authorities within Texas that would have prevented him from acquiring the assault weapon that he used to commit that shooting. And in that briefing that I attended, this guy had something like 30 15-round clips, shot 450 rounds, some from the outside into the church and some inside the church. But the net result was 26 people being killed and many others wounded. And so the award on that one, or the mandate from the Air Force to those affected, $230 million. There was an incident that happened just this last week, a jury awarding penalty damages to Spectrum TV out of Dallas, Texas, in the amount of like $7.3 billion. And it's one thing, we've been seeing these down in the millions, but now over $1 billion. And apparently what happened is they had an employee, and the reason that they charged that much to the company, or awarded him, we'll see what they actually pay, but the reason it was so much apparently was the company did not do their due diligence and background screening, and if they had, they would have seen this guy lied on his resume, and other complicating factors like possibly forging documents to try and limit their liability. And it resulted in this guy going into one of the client's house, the customer's house, come back the next day when he was actually off duty, and he robs the lady and kills her. And the jury considered to be such extreme circumstances surrounding that corporate incident that they awarded, like I said, over $7.3 billion. And then the most recent one here, a lawsuit, class action lawsuit, filed as part of the horrible shooting down at the elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, in the amount of $27 billion. So it seems like that, you sit back and say, well, why is this the case? What's happening? And I think there are probably a number of different factors. But, and just to compare and contrast an incident that I was involved in, I had a court case in San Diego several years ago that was a workplace shooting, and the families of one of the individuals that was shot and killed filed a lawsuit against the bus company and said, basically, was this a preventable incident? Well, in this case, the guy had been working there for many years, but about 30 days before the incident occurred, he started acting weird. And he was making threatening statements to his coworkers. He was saying to them, I think you're trying to get my job. He'd stalk them around during the workday, and follow them really closely and make threatening statements. but they didn't have a program in place. And so late one night, after the shift, he goes into the supervisor's office, pulls out a gun, gets in an argument, and shoots and kills the two supervisors. Well, in the depositions and when we were being interviewed by the attorneys, basically what they were looking for was this a preventable incident, and the standard they were using was it more likely than not, because you never know for sure with human behavior. But it was my assessment that you had an opportunity to intervene for 30 days and you had no program and nobody knew what to do, and bam, it blew up. Well, in that particular incident, the award was around $5 million in a settlement. So what's changing? What's changing between what we've seen happen for the last 10, 12 years with these incidents as far as the financial dynamics? I think there are probably, like I said a minute ago, there are probably different factors, but one of them is I think that there is an increased intolerance among the people across the United States for this extreme violence. These incidents are happening with increased frequency, they're happening with increased lethality, they're happening in all sectors of society. And so when a jury sees an opportunity, particularly if the organization was either negligent or they tried to cover up things, or they were the government and they just dropped the ball, I think there's a perception that somebody's got to do something, and so we're going to reach to the extreme when it comes to the financial damages. There's just an overall lack of trust, and especially when you see something happen like what we saw with the elementary school, where people are trusting that the school and the county and the city are going to do what they can to take care of their kids, and that if something bad has happened, that the law enforcement is going to respond effectively. And when that doesn't happen, then they want some level of accountability. So I don't know what's going to happen with both. I'm sure there'll be an appeals for that Spectrum TV incident, this $7 billion award of punitive damages, and now this class action suit. But what we are seeing is a general trend of dramatic increase financial impact of these incidents over what we've seen historically. So it's part of the reason that we put together our program called the Safe Workplace Certification. And the reality is, these incidents can happen anywhere, but if an organization has done their due diligence, I believe it's a fair statement that you can lessen the organization's liability exposure by having a holistic program in place. And what I mean by holistic, I mean something that follows the national standards, that meets the OSHA requirements. And it doesn't mean that an incident couldn't happen in that organization any more than putting your kids through driver's ed means they couldn't get an offender bender. But it does mean you've done what you can, not to just prevent it, but also be able to respond effectively, and equipping your employees to respond effectively if they find themselves in that type of a crisis. So that means you got a policy that talks about what is acceptable behavior, and how do we respond to extreme incidents, and how do we train our people, and it all builds on a baseline of the policies and procedures. And then you have 4 levels of training, and in that ASIS national standard, international standard really, it talks about you have to have awareness training, and it's for all your employees, not just HR and security. It's just something that everybody from the secretary to the CEO needs to have a baseline understanding of what is workplace violence, what are the warning signs that somebody could be progressing towards violence. When they see them, who do they report them to? The issue of intimate partner or domestic violence, which, like I said earlier, was behind that horrible church shooting in Texas. What are the warning signs that somebody could be in that, and how do we help them? And then lastly is the issue of how do you train your people to respond in an active assailant or extreme violence event. Okay, that's your awareness training. And then you have enhanced training for managers and supervisors. And they need to be trained on, okay, I have my employee that reported this red flag. Now how do I go in and de-escalate a tense situation? How do I help somebody that's in a distressed state? Most managers and supervisors don't have a lot of training in that, but yet they play a critical role in preventing violence from happening. And then if they see this red flag and it's high enough to where concern or needs to go to a 3rd level, that threat management team, well, then they're trained on how to do that and how to do that effectively. And then at that threat management team, you actually have a formal team that assembles, gets trained, and manages any internal or external threats that would come and potentially impact that organization. So that would be your 3rd level of your threat assessment, threat management team, and they have resources they can reach to on the outside to help them know not just that there is a risk, but what do we do to mitigate it? How to respond to try and prevent this from turning, from a threat to a crisis. And then the 4th level is the executive team, and that would be your C-suite and possibly the board of directors. More and more, what I'm seeing happening is the the leaders of the company are going down to the HR and security departments and saying, what are we doing to prevent these things from happening in our company? Or the board of directors going to the CEO saying, what are you doing to make sure this doesn't happen in our company? And that's a shift. That's something that's new over the last couple of years. And so, in fact, when I talk about that, it can happen anywhere. I was doing training for a CEO of a very large retail company a few years ago, and we were teaching him on what to do if they had an incident in their company and how to prevent it from happening. But you're the leader, and maybe you could have extra exposure. And even what if you got taken hostage and it's part of one of these incidents? How do you respond effectively? And when we got done doing that training, he looked at me and said, "Hey, Randy," he said, "I've always thought that bad things don't happen to good people and good companies." He said, "But I know I'm wrong. And so we're going to change how we approach this issue and build the resiliency within our company." I had another CEO of a very large clothing manufacturer in the Midwest, and he called us in because he was seeing more and more red flags just in his own community. And he was becoming increasingly concerned about how does he protect his employees and their workspace. And so when I was in his office, he said to me, he said, Randy, I see all these red flags. I see the increase in violence. And if I knew that there was stuff that I could do or there was training I could provide that would try and minimize the chances of this happening in my company, and I didn't do it, and if something happened, he said, I just couldn't live with myself. And so, we worked with him to provide a holistic program for their entire enterprise. So, it's starting to, more and more companies are putting the programs into place. But you'd be amazed at how many still have gaps, whether it's the awareness training or the manager training or having that whole package put together. And that's why we put together the Safe Workplace Certification Program, is to help organizations be able to implement that and then to come alongside them if there is subsequent litigation or an incident does occur. So if you'd like to learn more about that, feel free to reach us at info@cpps.com, and we'll keep watching this trend and see what other data points occur that we can pass along to you all. All right, stay safe and get a hold of us if we can be of help. Thank you.